credit, put your name and your license number into the chat. And you can Venmo at CG Partners $10, and it's a business account. We're going to go, Angela, you want to take it away and we can kind of tag team it here?
Sure. So yeah, guys, we're going to get through the 1 to 4 and just kind of before we even start, this is something, it took me a little while to learn this when I was starting out. If you have a townhouse, there is a condo form, but if you're doing a townhouse, you need to use the 1 to 4 contract, not the condo contract. And sometimes the property, it's hard to tell. Sometimes townhouses look like condos. So, and if you're not sure, always go to the tax rolls, DCAD, TAD, whatever one you're in. So just first of all, make sure you are using the right contract, because I have agents all the time coming to me and saying, hey, I just got this on the wrong form. So then you got to start all over. So starting with that. So then the parties, as far as the seller, usually if the listing agent sometimes will let you know up front, okay, the names of the parties are such and such, but generally we go to the tax rolls. Once again, sometimes they're not correct. A situation where it's not correct might be if the, let's say Susan Smith bought the house when she was single and now she's married. Because Texas is a community property state, you're going to have to, at some point, even if it's not up front, it's going to have to be amended. So it's Susan Smith, it's Susan Smith Jones and Michael Jones on it. So, but these are, this is how, and then for the buyer, however you want to hold the name in. The second section is the property description, and always be extra careful here because this is the legal description and this is how title is pulled. And, on Netris, they'll write it in there. But again, that's easily mistyped, and just do that quick search to the tax rolls and stuff to make sure you've got the lot and block number and subdivision correctly.
And one point, guys, on the seller, if it's your listing and you're not exactly sure because it's passed through an estate, or I encourage you at the time that you sign the listing agreement to connect with your preferred title company and have them flesh it out and see who the actual seller is. When it comes to the listing agreement, it's okay if you don't have it perfect. When it comes to, because that's just between us and them and we can always amend it or fix it. When it comes to binding the seller to another third party, to the buyer, it has to be correct. So always ask the title company if you're not exactly sure how to state the seller's name. I had a very experienced agent reach out to me this week and be like, what do I write here? And I was like, just for the listing agreement, just use this. But when it comes to the contract, you absolutely have to have it right. So check with the title company.
Zareen?
Yes.
On that note, like I have a buyer and they've signed the buyer's representation agreement under their names, but they've just let me know that they want to buy the property in a partnership. Mm-hmm. So I don't have to have them re-sign the buyer's agreement. That's what you're saying.
I mean, no, that's between us and them. I mean, if you want it to be, the lawyer in me is like, absolutely, it needs to be like the right, perfect parties, but it sounds like their intent was there. I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so moving on, paragraph 2B, improvements. There's no blank here, but just to kind of briefly go over it with you. This is stating what all is conveying with the property. And these include things, fixtures are a big one. So if it's attached to the house, with more than just like a nail on the wall, then the assumption is it stays. So, and then certain accessories like garage door openers, ceiling fans, TV mounts, that's a big one. The assumption is the mount, if you have a mounted TV, the mount stays, but the TV goes. So, and then just skipping down to D below it on exclusions, if there are any of those things that are listed in B that the seller wants to take with them, that needs to be listed in the exclusion. Let's say there's a great chandelier in the dining room and they want to take it. You'd write dining room chandelier. You would be surprised at how many times this becomes an issue so often. We just had an agent in a lawsuit about his client. He was brought in as a witness over whether a grill was really affixed or if it was movable. So, and they brought a JP, a $10,000 JP court thing. So So.
And you
be-
guys, it's a best practice. If you have, it's usually like a chandelier or like beautiful mirrors in a bathroom. If you have a listing and the seller wants to keep those, my recommendation is just take them down before you take photos and before you list the property and swap it out, because you don't want to say, oh, we're going to remove these mirrors and we'll replace them or something like that, and then them not be pleased. So my recommendation, if there's something precious like that, is just get it out of there before.
Agreed.
Yes. Paragraph 3 is the sales price. So this is when you're, submitting a contract, presenting an offer, the sales price that you are proposing to pay for it, and how the contract is broken down. You are supposed to say how much you are going to finance and how much you are going to pay cash for it, so that those two lines add up to the sales price on that. Obviously, if you are doing a all cash transaction, you would leave the top two ones blank and just put that amount. So, and then the next section is, do you have anything else to add about that, Zureen?
Nope. Well, the only thing that's come up recently is when people are doing financing, but they don't have any contingencies related to the financing, you don't have to check any of those boxes. So if you're buying a $500,000 house and you're putting 200 down and, financing 300, but you're not actually going to do any contingencies. It's like, we're waiving the appraisal, we're waiving the personal property, we're waiving that the individual qualifies. You can just put those numbers in there and not fill out any of the forms.
Yeah, because this one, the box that is normally checked if you are doing any financing and you want the contingency is the third party financing addendum. So the numbers there tie into that. So, and that's the addendum you always use if you do have those financing contingencies.
Sorry, so I want to make sure I understood Zareen's point. So if the client is willing to waive both the right to terminate based on buyer approval and the right to terminate based on property approval, we don't even have to present the third-party financing addendum?
So this is what's happened recently, is that an agent calls me and they're like, well, it's not contingent on the individual qualifying, and we're totally waiving the appraisal. And they're like, what are the other reasons that the property might not appraise? And I'm like, well, it may not be insurable and it may not meet the condo rules. And if the buyer is saying like, I want none of those contingencies, then don't do that. It's very rare that this happens, but that's an option. So if you get in that situation where they're trying to draft all this language about like other contingencies being waived, and I'm like, just don't attach it. It's very rare, but is happening sometimes now in this market. So that comes up for you, just give me or Angela a call.
Okay.
Quick question. So like she said, if you check the box that the buyer's already credit approved, okay, you're waiving, like you said, the appraisal, you're waiving it all, waiving it. But you still have to attach the third-party financing, that it's part of the contract, even though there's no contingencies with it, except for, like you said, the insurance and the HOA. But that's the HOA rules are part of that addendum, a separate addendum, right?
Right.
So the insurance comes in with having the third-party financing addendum attached, correct?
Yes. Yes. So there are some protections there for the buyer, even if you're
I see.
waiving appraisal and you're waiving the
Right.
individual qualifying. There's still some contingencies there. The property has to be insurable, and then it has to pass the HOA's standards. So
Which is the HOA addendum, and the third-party financing is really just covering insurance.
Yes.
Okay.
yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So paragraph 4 has to do with leases. So this is if there is a lease on the property. This does not have to do with the seller is going to lease back, under a seller's temporary lease. That's addressed later in the property. This is you're buying an investment property, let's say, and there's a tenant who lives in there, or even you've got a house with a back house and you've got a tenant in there. So this is the obligation for, and then there's that's residential leases. This also addresses fixture leases such as a solar panel or security system, and the natural gas resource leases that we see a lot of in Fort Worth. So if you have one of those situations, then you need to check the appropriate box in there, and there for residential and fixture leases, there is a corresponding addendum. But basically it's a requirement that you provide the the buyer with the copies of the leases, so they know what they are, that's part of the obligation when they buy when they buy the property. So, and on those addendum there, you're saying whether hopefully your seller has the leases in hand and are giving it to the buyer before the contract is even signed, because if not, there's some outs for the buyer. So just be very mindful of that. Okay, on to page 2, earnest money and termination option. If any of y'all have been in the business over a year, this section was radically rewritten about a year ago, less than a year ago, so that now both the earnest money, which is usually, in normal times about 1% of the purchase price, which goes to the title company, and then the option fee, which gives a free look period, which it's all now paid to the title company, but then the title company sends the option fee portion to the seller. So, and it can either be in one check, but so the check or the wire is made out to the title company. So let's say it's $10,000 for the earnest money and $1,000 for the option. So total of $11,000. So that can either be one check or two check to there. So, and just a word of warning, and Zareen and I were involved. We have an agent and who got in a horrible situation a couple of months ago. The agent put the wrong amounts in each blank. It's written very close to each other. I'm hoping, when they revise the contract, maybe they'll put it on separate lines, but she put, it was $20,000 earnest money and she put that under option money.
Oh,
and
boy.
500 or whatever for that, and canceled. And and the other agent was terrible, and they kept the money. Which legally they could, ethically, I think it's awful. And so this agent had to come out of pocket $20,000. So just really.
Where was the other agent? Was she not in our office, but
No.
someone
So,
that we would know, or
No.
someone like,
no, but
yeah,
it was, but just be so careful. So now I'm really paranoid. So
Yeah.
about this.
Question, Angela and Zareen and everybody else. Typically, my rule of thumb for those monies is 1% for earnest and 0.1% for option. In today's market, how, what are your thoughts on having to deviate from that rule of thumb?
Oh, I can attest. You have to deviate a lot.
Yeah, I think
option fees are high these days. Even on something that's like $400,000, option fees can be $1,000, $500.
it just shows
and earnest money. Yeah, it can be 2% still on something that's
since the option money is the money that the buyer's not getting back, the higher it is, it's meaningful to the seller that it shows this buyer has some skin in the game, right? So instead of the typical like 100 to 200, if you put 1,000, it's like these people are already really committed. They're $1,000 invested. Same thing with earnest money. It's just, it's just a sign of good faith that the buyer has those funds and is committed. So, generally, yes, Paul is right. The rule of thumb in a normal market is, earnest money is generally at 1% of the purchase price, and option fee is usually, between, 100 to 500 or whatever, depending on how long you're asking and what's the purchase price. But yes, in this crazy market, you're seeing both of those numbers go up. So just something to be aware of. And so just to go back, when you guys are filling this out, what people do is they say, deliver to, Republic Title. And if you have a specific closer you want, put, Republic Title, Selena Underwood as escrow agent at, and then put the office where she's in, right? If you don't put a specific closer and you don't deliver it specifically to the closer you want, they're just going to give it to whoever is available. So I encourage you to be specific.
Okay.
Great. And so you have 3 days to deliver those 2 fees. So, and it's 3 days. And if the third day is on a weekend or a holiday, then it's due the next business day thereafter. And that's a hard deadline for that. So just if you guys want an option, just make absolutely sure that is delivered.
And I have
it's
someone
better-
ask me the other day, Like the second day was a holiday and then the third day wasn't. So they were like, do I get an extra day? And I said, no, it's only the last day is the holiday.
And it's better for us to stay out of it and just connect the buyer directly with the title company and have them work it out, right? As opposed to us getting a check and then going to the title company like in the old days.
Whatever is easiest for your client. Some people want to do wires, some people want to deliver checks, some people want you to deliver the check. I would just ask the client, what do they
Okay.
prefer? They use Zacom now, a lot of the title companies, so.
So there's-
Angela, before you
yeah.
skip down, I'm sorry, what would be a circumstance for which there would be extra earnest money having to be delivered later?
Well, one situation might be if you've got a backup contract and you're putting down a nominal amount originally, but you probably
Okay.
add also some special provision language. But again, it's something but a normal non-backup situation, maybe you're just trying to show your seriousness and that like after a certain point, like after inspections or something. So, Zareen, do you want to chime in? Do you have other?
Yeah, I mean, typically.
I didn't get that.
Oops.
Could you?
My watch is trying to weigh in. You don't really see it that often, but it would just be like, a lot of times if the option is 7 days, they say on the 8th day, we're going to deposit, $10,000 extra just as a sign of good faith, but you don't see it that often really.
Okay.
And so B, the termination option, that's just saying more about what it is that they can cancel. And so that's just, you fill in the number of days, obviously. We used to see like 7 to 10, it's gotten much, much shorter. 5 is kind of, the norm. And so these are, and just, the script to say to your buyers, just let them know that the inspectors are all used to working with this. This is their whole business is based on this provision, and that you can get someone out to inspect a house within a day or so. Let them know that, there is quick turnaround on that.
So in paragraph C, the next one, I just want to point this one out to you guys. The contract was revised to provide that if the buyer doesn't deliver their earnest money in time, then the seller has the right to terminate. It does not automatically terminate. And at that point, if we get past the 3rd day and the buyer still hasn't delivered the earnest money, then it's kind of a race. Because if the buyer delivers the earnest money on the 5th day, no harm, no foul. If the seller terminates before the buyer delivers the earnest money, then obviously the deal is off. So if the seller doesn't ever terminate, there's no penalty for the buyer delivering it lately. It just gives the seller the option. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And please be aware that this applies only to the earnest money, not to the option money. If you deliver the option money late, you're out of luck.
You just don't have an option. Contract's there, but you don't have the out. Yeah.
And so I have a quick question. And so kind of like, so, for example, if the kind of like the executed document was signed on Thursday, and so the Friday is the first day to kind of like submit the earnest money and the option fee. And then after that, the weekend, when should the deadline to submit the money to the title company?
It would be due Monday. So they were signed on Thursday, right? So day 1 is Friday, day 2 is Saturday, day 3 is Sunday. And since that's a weekend and the title company's not over, it's the next business day. So Monday.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, title policy, paragraph 6. Seller shall furnish.
Just real quick, I'm just going to point out, because it's see in bold there, guys, in legal language, that's called bold and conspicuous language, which means that they really want you to pay attention to it. It basically says time is of the essence for this paragraph. And that means in other paragraphs in this contract, it's not automatically default if you don't do it in a timely fashion. But because this one expressly states boldly and conspicuously that time is of the essence, then that means that if you miss your deadline, it's automatically default for this paragraph only, paragraph 5. So that's just what time is of the essence means. It's like a legal term of art.
And what about right above that, where it says about the option money also, failure to deliver?
Yeah, time is of the essence for the whole paragraph 5. So what's the question? Yeah, if you fail to deliver it timely, you're out of luck. You don't have the right to terminate.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to point
But
that out.
does the seller also have the right to terminate based on that?
No, the buyer just doesn't have an option.
Okay,
But-
got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so paragraph 6 has to do with the title policy. A box is checked, who is going to pay for the title policy. Traditionally, it's been the seller, but we're seeing a lot more contracts where the buyer's offering to pay for it just because it helps sweeten the deal in this competitive market. Title, if your buyer's probably going to say, well, how much is the title policy? If you Google Texas title policy, title insurance calculator, you will come up with one, and it's regulated by the state, how much it is. So you can say, okay, for $500,000 house, it's going to be $4,722. So you can give in, because it is a big expense. It's the seller's biggest closing cost next to commissions. So, and then for the line below it where it says issued by, you would put that same title company where you've put above where you want to close.
And one point that this is like urban realtor myth, that whoever's paying for the title policy gets to choose the title company. And that's just not true. That might be like the industry standard. And I get in this market, generally speaking, whoever the listing agent says is preferred is who's the buyer's going to choose, because that's not necessarily a term that's worth fighting over, but that is a negotiable term. So even if you're having the seller pay for it, but your brother owns a title company and you want to use them, like you can write that in and it's negotiable. It's not like, oh, well, seller's paying for it, so they get to choose. That's not true.
Oh, cool.
Okay, so moving down to the title policy, you will, when you get the title policy, and we're going to have a class, right? We're with the title company. We're going to kind of go through this a little bit more. Aren't we, Zareen, coming up?
Yes.
We have a mock closing.
Yeah, we
and
have,
maybe even next week or something.
it's next Friday is the mock closing.
Yeah, so we'll go into this in more depth, but there are exceptions to title, say things that the title policy is not going to cover. So, and those include things like easements. If there's a utility easement, running across the property, restrictive covenants, things like that. So you'll get the title policy back. And the section B below commitment, what you actually get back, it's called the commitment or a binder. And you get that back within 20 days. It's supposed to be delivered. And then you put in, the buyer has X number of days to go over it. And if they have any issues with it, then they make an exception, they make a challenge to it.
So in this 6A8, this is basically one of the standard exceptions. It's called shortages in area. And the title policy, if you want, will sell you an endorsement that would provide you to have that coverage, but it costs extra. It's 5% of the cost of the premium of the policy. So that's actually a number you can also calculate. I think, and I don't remember the math, I think on a $500,000 policy, it's like $300 or something. Don't hold me to the math, but it's a small amount. It's like the policy is a specific amount based on the purchase price. And then this additional coverage is 5% of that premium. And it's, does the buyer want this coverage or not? As agents, I would never want to say to my client, like, don't get that, because, and then if they didn't get it and there's an issue, then it's like, you told me not to get it. So you kind of just have to explain to them what it is and let them choose. When we ask title companies about what they're seeing, generally speaking, they do see that people are opting to have this coverage. And in this market right now, the buyer is paying for it. But before this market, they were saying it was about 50-50.
You're talking about whether we will be amended or not
Yes.
amended, right? And who will pay for it.
6A8.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just an additional endorsement that they're giving the buyer the option to have or not. It's more protection. It makes their policy a little bit stronger because it protects over boundary issues.
Right.
That makes
So,
sense?
pardon?
Does that make sense, guys? Okay. Yes.
Okay, so moving on to page 3, the survey. There are 3 different scenarios here. Most title companies require a survey. I've heard a couple of things recently, if it's with cash transactions, with them not requiring it recently. Do you hear much of that, Zareen?
I haven't heard that, but
I've heard
I
like
mean,
two or three in the last month,
it
which I never
probably
really.
makes sense. You just, your buyer just has to understand that if there's no survey, then they're getting no protection over any type of survey related issue. So the policy is not very strong. Basically, all that they're getting coverage for is that the seller did in fact own the property. So you just have to be really careful with that. It's really your buyer's choice.
Right.
I think every buyer should get a brand new survey. That makes your policy the strongest. And it's a relatively small cost compared to what it might protect you from.
So a survey, what, about $600-ish for just a standard, you know,
Yeah.
a standard residential lot, just to give you an idea. So.
And absolutely on a luxury property, I would encourage my clients to get a new survey. That's me, unless the survey is just a couple years old and no changes have been made. I would always encourage with a luxury property to get a new survey.
So on the other end of the spectrum, and this may be one of the deals that Angela is referring to, I just sold not a tear down, but practically, okay, a home basically for the price of the lot. And the buyer, who's an investor, did not care or want a survey. And I didn't know, so I'm saying it for my colleagues who may not know, that I was instructed then to literally cross out that whole section regarding the survey, because there was not going to be a survey at all. And the buyer was okay with it. The buyer was not interested in a survey.
And so did the title company instruct you to do that, or did the client instruct you to do that?
No, you guys, I mean, Briggs Freeman instructed me to cross it out.
Just
Yeah,
cross
the
it out.
OC, you know, so yeah, so, and everyone signed off on it because there wasn't a survey requirement as part
Mhm.
of it. But again, this is a very rare situation. So like I said, yes, yours is one that I was talking about, and I had another one like a week later. So, but so 99.9% of the time there is going to be a survey involved when you buy. So the first section on C is what to do if there's an existing survey. So if there is an existing survey, and you do want to try, the buyer's okay with trying to use it. The seller has a specified number of days to furnish it. And there is an affidavit that comes with, that the seller signs and has notarized with it. It's called the T-47. So, and it's basically saying from the date that the seller owned the property, they know that no other changes or any changes that they list on the T-47 have been made to the property. So it's kind of tricky sometimes. Let's say there's a survey, let's say the survey was done in 2000, but they used the survey when the seller bought the house in 2005. And now, you know, in 2022, they want to use it again. The seller cannot attest that there are no changes, you know, going back to 2000, because he doesn't know what happened between 2000 and 2005. He can only attest for the period that he owned it. So again, that kind of weakens it. You know, it's the second generation or third generation, you know, if it's accepted. So usually, again, it's best if you do have a survey and it's going to be reused, that even though you can, it's best to make sure the seller is the one who had the survey ordered.
Yeah, and so, and as a listing agent, you guys, there's a couple of best practices here. If your seller's like, I have no idea where their survey is, if they know where they closed, you can call that title company and they should have a copy of it on file. So that's one way to track it down. The other thing is that we require as our Briggs Freeman's best practices is when you take a listing, get them the T-47 and have them fill it out with the listing paperwork, because you'll notice here in our bold and conspicuous language that if the seller fails to furnish the existing survey or the affidavit within the 3 days, within the time prescribed, or within not the 3 days, within the amount of time that you guys agree in that first blank that they have to deliver it, then the buyer automatically gets a new survey at the seller's expense. And guess who usually ends up paying for that?
And I had to pay for one time. You only do it one time. So
yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah.
It's an expensive mistake. So, and here's the crazy part is that a lot of title companies will be like, we'll just do it at closing. Don't worry about it. No, worry about it. That's terrible advice from the title company. Like get that T-47 completed and notarized when you get the listing paperwork so that you can just hand it to them. Okay. Don't wait.
why does it say the survey or the affidavit within the time period? And
Because
not
you have to
them
deliver.
both?
both. Yeah, they should. It should say if the seller doesn't furnish the existing survey and the affidavit. It's a good question.
If one of them's missing, then.
Yeah.
Then.
So I get, and again, this may be particularly difficult people, but I have buyers who don't want to sign or notarize anything until there is a formal offer and they are under contract. So, I mean, by this, they're not obligated to do it before. This is all.
That's
I'm-
fine.
I'm-
Yeah,
just have to
just be
explain it
real
to them.
mindful of the date.
Yeah, you
So,
just say,
yeah.
here's the
okay.
deal. We just have to be really mindful. I mean, at the end of the day, like we manage the process and the clients manage the decisions, right? So you just have to
Right.
explain to them, that's totally fine. Just so you know, as soon as we go under contract, you're gonna have to get yourself to a notary and get this submitted. Otherwise, it's a $700 cost to you to get a new survey.
Okay,
Exactly. So numbers 2 and 3 is if you're gonna be ordering a new survey as opposed to trying to use an existing survey. If the buyer, 2 is if the buyer's buying it, which is usually the norm, I would say, for a new survey. If then or 3 is if the seller's going to pay for it. So objections is, do you need anything else, Serene?
Nope.
Okay,
I had a
objections.
quick question real quick.
Yeah.
Throughout I feel like the whole contract, you always see within X amount of days. I feel like I learned like from my old boss, you put like a certain amount of days or like there's industry standard, but is there like a certain amount of days that you see for each box? It's like industry standard, or it's like you said, what's agreed upon, or like what a usual X amount of days is? Or like,
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would say if you have the survey and the T47, I would say, you know, anywhere from 3 to 7 days is normal. If you're the buyer and you're writing the offer, the longer it takes them to deliver, the more time your buyer has to object. So there's not a huge rush. It's just leaving a contingency out there kind of. So I would put, 7 to 10 days if you're writing an offer and you don't know.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, so objections. Buyer may object to defects, exceptions, encumbrances disclosed in this survey. So this is when, which prohibit any of the items that were listed in the previous section, and then also any uses or activity. So an example of something you might put on that line might be, construction of in-ground swimming pool. And then you get the survey back and there's a sewer easement running through the middle of the backyard. So that would so if you put that in there, then they get the survey and they see, oh, ew, there's this, we can't ever build a pool because this is totally obstructing the way to do that. So that would give them then the right to cancel. Or, another example might be construction of a new 2-story house with at least 4,000 square feet. And then you get, you find out from the title work that there's an overlay in the neighborhood that prohibits 2-story structures or something like that.
And the other one that I see frequently is rental property. So a lot of people are buying houses right now to use as rentals. And if it's in an HOA, a lot of HOAs restrict the type of rental so you might want to put that in there. And then one thing that I see frequently that's not right is people put single family use. It's really unnecessary.
Yeah.
So
sorry for my ignorance, but what's an overlay in general?
It's a zoning thing. So
Okay.
when the tear down trend was starting 15 years ago, we were seeing a lot of them. So yeah. So then if they are objecting to something like that, then let's say the pool scenario or something, we put number of days, they have to object, you send that to the seller. And if the seller can't cure it, which they probably won't be able to do because, they're not going to get a sewer easement removed, then the buyer has the right to cancel.
And what you would put in that blank, you have to be strategic. So if you're the buyer, you would like unlimited time. So you would rather have nothing in there, right? But if you submit an offer with nothing in there, and then you just say they just have to object before the closing date, the listing agent, if they're smart, will fill that blank in and come back and say 2 days or 3 days, which is a very short amount of time. Because typically, if there's some title issue and the buyer wants to make objections, they might want to loop their attorney in. So the buyer wants as much time as possible. The seller wants that day to be as short as possible. So I recommend, if you're representing the buyer, to put in like 5 days. If you try, or 7 days. 7 days is kind of long, and the listing agent may be like, no way, 3 days. So you just have to be strategic about how many days is appropriate. I wouldn't ask for less than 3 days, because it just takes some time to kind of review things and turn it around. So I would put, 5 days on the buy side at least. Does that make sense? Just a little strategy of what should go in that blank, at least 5 days.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And that's the same rationale, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be slow here, but does the same rationale go for the one above, what, 8 should?
The survey. I can't hear you anymore, Paula.
Yeah, Paula, you muted yourself. Your microphone's red.
Okay, I'm sorry. I know I call Angela on this every time. So on C, going back to C, on the other options, if there isn't a survey existing, option 2 and 3, if we're representing the buyer, what would be a strategic amount of time?
I mean, surveyors are really busy right now. So you just have to ask the title company, like, what's your surveyor's turnaround time? And really, as long as the buyer places the order, it's kind of out of our hands. So that's not a
Okay.
date that's like super meaningful. I would put probably, 7 to 10 days. A lot of
Okay.
people want to wait to order the survey until after the option. So you might want to
Right.
be strategic about that too. So if you have a 7-day option, you might say 8 days or 10 days, because you don't want to spend the money if you're not going to go through with the deal.
Right, which is what Angela was explaining to me. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, moving on to E, title notices, membership in a mandatory property association. If it is there, you would check the is versus is not box, and you would have the addendum for the mandatory HOA be part of the contract. So a mandatory HOA is, when you have to, by being part of it, living in a certain neighborhood. Usually this has to do with gated neighborhoods, newer communities, as opposed to more in-town neighborhoods, like, most of Highland Park and Lakewood and things like that are not in HOAs. You may have like a little, voluntary, $100 a year thing, but this is when it's like legit, and they can tie it to your property ownership and everything. So just there, if you have that situation, there is the addendum that goes along with it. At the bottom of the page, statutory tax districts, that has to do with MUDs, municipal utility districts. We see this more in the suburbs, especially the new suburbs, a lot, like out in Prosper, Trophy Club, Salina. There's additional taxes for certain utilities of sorts, and there's different notices required. Tidewater annexation, we really don't have to deal with that here.
Sorry, quick question. Go back to
Go ahead.
the HOA. For the condominium contracts, you don't need the extra addendum, do you, for the HOA? Because that's kind of in the contract, or you do?
Exactly. That's a big difference. Yeah, it's very similar to the language in the
The addendum, it's just built in.
Yeah, but but the days are a little different, so be careful of that. So and then going on to number 6 on page 4, utility service provider, and then 7 is a PID, a public improvement district. We do see this quite a bit, both in town and in the burbs, even down to parts of downtown Dallas and uptown are in a public improvement district. So, and there is a form that goes along with that. So, property condition. The seller must permit buyer and buyer's agents to access the property at reasonable times. The buyer is allowed to have it inspected, etc. What we see a lot of times, a seller will get testy, let's say after the normal inspection, and the buyer wants to keep coming in with its designer and, this contractor. and you do see some fights about that. So, the argument becomes what is reasonable. So, and then we also sometimes will see a buyer wanting to do a walkthrough the day of or day before closing. And sometimes a seller gets real like, no, they're not going to do the deal's gone kind of south and they don't want to do it. But it's something you have to deal with and kind of fight your way through it sometimes, because sometimes each side digs in. Agree, Zareen?
Yeah, I mean, the key there, whenever like agents call and they'll be like, the seller says we can't access the property anymore, we can't do a final walkthrough. It's like, that's just wrong. 7A requires that the buyer is allowed to have reasonable access. The debate is what is reasonable. A walkthrough the day before closing is perfectly reasonable.
Right.
Going there with your designer every day for 3 hours is not reasonable. So there's like a happy medium, right?
Right. So the next section has to do with seller's disclosure, and you check either if they've received it at the time the contract was executed, or else you put in how long the seller has to get it to the buyer. We really, really encourage our agents to get it to the buyer's agent before, preferably put it in Netris under media, so it is there, because if it is not delivered prior to the contract being executed at any time,
Giving them a 7-day option.
contract. Yeah, there's 7 days until they get it,
This is
after they get
super
it.
important. Yeah, that's why we require that you deliver the seller's disclosure as part of the listing paperwork here, because you're saving this automatic out, and definitely if you're in multiple offers on a listing, every box, this should be checked, right? Every buyer should acknowledge receipt of the seller's disclosure. So it's really important. And if you're looking for the exceptions of when the seller is not required to furnish it, they're very narrow. You can look at 5.008E of the Texas Property Code says it's like 11 exceptions.
Yeah, so something like an estate, a new construction does not require one. If it's an estate, they do not. There's several.
Transfer between family members, foreclosure, things like that. If it's an investor who's never lived in the property or never even set eyes on the property, they still have to fill it out. That's not an exception.
And they try to get out of that all the time.
All the time.
All the time, yeah. So the next disclosure is the lead-based paint disclosure, and this is required on any property that was constructed prior to 1978. So just make sure you have that. Both the buyer, the seller, and each agent needs to sign off on that. So, and usually 99% of the time, the seller does not have knowledge of lead paint. So, and then 99% of the time, the buyer waives its right to do a lead-based paint testing, but yet it is required. Okay, next D, acceptance of property condition as is. So it says as is, means present condition of the property. You wouldn't ordinarily check number one at you accept it as is versus as is, except for certain repairs. Checking as is does not prohibit the buyer from doing an inspection and coming back and making requests for things the inspector finds. A situation would be, if where you would do number two, where you're asking for repairs up front, would be something that's like visible to the eye, something that's known. So
the most frequent one is if the seller markets the property as like roof is being replaced the first week of March. It's like, okay, well, we're going to put this property under contract, but we're not accepting it as is, because you're obviously going to factor that into the price. So you're going to check the box and you're going to say, seller will repair the roof in accordance with the estimate from Tarrant Roofing Company dated whatever, right? You're going to say whatever it is that the seller has already promised to do, but that doesn't waive your right to negotiate for additional repairs during the option.
Mm-hmm. Okay, E has to do with lender required repairs. Sometimes there is big repairs that the lender requires. If you're doing FHA, there might be even more, but termites, roof foundations seem to be the big ones. And then the seller, you know, is agreeing to do any repairs.
So yeah, so basically what this provision says is the lender may require repairs. No one's required to do them. If the seller says, no, I'm not doing that, then, and the buyer is like, I'm not going to pay for it either, then the contract just terminates and the buyer gets their money back. If the repairs come back and the cost of the repairs is more than 5% of the whole sales price, the buyer unilaterally has the right to say, like, I don't want this house. It has too many required repairs, and the buyer has the right to terminate there. Doesn't happen very often, but just good to know that that's in there.
Zareen, going back to D, where the two boxes of as is or as is with some specific repairs. I mean, you don't have to check either of those, right?
Well, you need to check the first one because I mean, this is an as is contract. I would check the first one. What would be the thought process behind not?
I thought you said you would not normally do that.
Normally you would check D1, which is like
Okay.
the buyer is accepting the property in its current condition right now,
Okay.
Right.
And then their out is under
the option.
kind of E, yeah, under the option, or if it's like outrageously lots of repairs.
Only if
Well,
it's under required repair.
Only, yeah.
Yeah. But really the option, I mean, you can cancel. I mean, most people, and that's probably the reason most people cancel during the option is because they can't come to terms on repairs, but really it's any reason. So, you know, a lot of states have their cancellation of the buyer tied to repairs, but ours is broader and more pro buyer.
Open. They can just change their mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So H is residential service contracts, which is also kind of referred to sometimes as residential home warranty. So this is if the buyer wants to ask for the seller to purchase one of these contracts for him, it gives them, you know, an extra level of protection for a year, and then it could be renewable at the buyer's expense after that. So again, in this market, the seller's going to look at his bottom line. So, you know, if it does give protection, but it's also going, let's say it's a $500 contract, which is kind of about the minimum. So for one of these, you know, if he's got two same offers and one is asking for it, one isn't, he's going to be doing the math saying, well, this offer is really $500 better because I'm, you know, asking for that. But it does give some protection. First time buyers, I think they really like this, just kind of, you know, being scared. Oh, what if the AC goes out right away? Or what if the hot water heater explodes? So, and it is good. So, and there's lots of companies that do it. So we, you know, just have.
This is one of those things where if you're the listing agent and you receive an offer where they're asking for this, I would never say no. I would just factor it into the cost and net it out. So if it's $1 million contract and they ask for $1,000 of home warranty, rather than your seller being like, no, just think of it as a $999,000 contract, right? Because if the buyer wants it, just get it for them. It's kind of my thought process. And one quick thing to point out, guys, in section 7F, you can see it says, you know, seller shall complete repairs prior to the closing date, and all required permits must be obtained, and repairs and treatments must be performed by persons who are licensed. So all the time we see in amendments, people are like, licensed plumber must do this. You don't have to put that. Like, it's required in the contract that like the seller can't make the repairs themselves. They have to hire someone who has a license to do that trade.
Great. So number 8 is if you are selling to a broker, you know, if the broker is related, let's say you're selling your sister a house. So you'd put, you know, buyer Alicia Taylor is sister of agent Angela Thornhill, just, you know, of course, the golden rule is disclose, just so there's no, you know, it looks like everyone's in cahoots.
And we always get calls about this, like, should I disclose this? I always say, like, if it's something that you think you should disclose, just go ahead and disclose it, because it's the kind of thing that if they find out during the course of the contract and they're like, well, why didn't they tell me that? That's weird. You're just creating unnecessary weirdness when you can just be transparent.
Right. So closing on or before a date, when you fill this out, you know, make sure it's a business day and that your clients are in town. Of course, it's negotiable. So, so this is, you know,
I recommend not closing on Fridays just because if something there's a hiccup, then you're screwed until Monday. So I always recommend Wednesday or Thursday as a good day to close. It gives you a little bit of time to clean up if something doesn't come together the way it's supposed to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so there is no time is of the essence clause with the closing. And sometimes we have situation where the lender is behind with the docs and everyone gets all in a tizzy and everything. And so, what to do. So, and, technically they're in default, but really, we usually go forward with it, but people will usually yell and scream about it, especially like, if there are other offers, backups and stuff.
We have a really good TAR FAQ. If you get in this situation where your buyer was supposed to close Wednesday and they can't close until Thursday or Friday, it's very clear that time isn't of the essence on the closing date. And it says that the buyer is allowed, or they're within a reasonable time. So the question is, what is reasonable? Like, is 2 weeks reasonable? Probably not. Is a day or two reasonable? Probably so. So just be mindful of that.
Okay, possession. So section 10, you check if they are going to deliver, possession is going to change as of closing and funding, or if the seller is going to lease back for, a couple of days, couple of weeks, and this market, a couple of months. So, and, actually, and the buyer, there is a lease where the buyer can move in before closing too. So, but usually it's the seller, and having the buyer move in before closing is pretty risky, but I've seen it done several times. So, so if you do use a temporary lease, that must be attached to the contract as well. And, a word of warning that is in bold and conspicuous language, make sure insurance is addressed. So if you are the seller and you are going to be leasing back for 2 weeks, your homeowner's insurance is going to be null and void when you close. But you've got, your lovely possessions and stuff. Make sure, somewhere you get a short-term policy or your insurance agents told you it's covered under an umbrella you have or something else. So just be aware of that.
So that would just be for the personal belongings, right? Because the home insurance now is being carried by the new owner.
Right, like a rental, like basically it's a renter's policy
Okay.
for personal property inside the home, because the structure you don't need covered anymore because the buyer has their own insurance.
And the whole business of that lease back time being limited to 2 months or 60 days, I don't see it on the contract. Is that because of the mortgage requirements?
So there's a couple of issues there. If generally speaking, if the buyer's mortgage company, if they're buying it as a personal home using a personal home mortgage, they don't want to see that the seller is staying there for 4 months, because then it looks like a rental. So that's one thing you just need to be aware of. The second thing is that if you are going to do a longer term lease back, at some point our dinky little 2-page, seller's temporary lease is not sufficient for all the landlord tenant issues that may come up. And you need to actually use the TAR promulgated lease form, which is more robust. It's very protective of the landlord, that particular document. But I think if it's over 3 months, I think, is that correct, Angela?
I think it's 2 months. I think it's
2
60
months?
days.
Okay,
Yeah.
if it's over 60 days,
Yeah.
then
So
you should
where
do
is,
it
see, I never find that. So I have sellers asking me that all the time. Like,
I
how
don't think
long
it's
can we
written,
lease
and I
back?
don't think it's written in the contract. It just has to
No.
do with the mortgage. So, yeah. So,
Okay, okay.
So if it's a cash, so theoretically, if it's a cash transaction, and they're
Right,
gonna,
no, I know.
then you wouldn't have.
But if it's a
that would make-
mortgage,
Right.
Yeah.
So, special provisions. Okay. This is where you've got to be careful that you aren't considered practicing law without a license. So, and I am here, Zarina's here, if you ever need any special language, factual statements. Some people will, in lieu of using a third or a non-realty addendum, write something in like, refrigerator conveys. I mean, you can do that, but we have an addendum for it, so use it. But really factual statements you can use, but what we don't want you to use are things where you're changing the obligations of the parties. So, yeah.
You really,
So-
there's really very little that you want to write in this paragraph. Maybe you want to write like seller will have the property professionally cleaned prior to closing, and will provide a receipt, like something like that. Not a huge deal. You can still reach out to us for that language. Anything that alters like the requirements of the parties, you need to have an attorney helping you with, whether it's me or Angela or the title company attorney. Please don't write anything in here. We just had a really sticky situation on a huge deal, a $3 million deal, where they were moving here from out of town and they insisted it wasn't a contingency, but it was a contingency. So the buyer our buyer told us what to write. So we wrote it in, and then it was terrible language. And everyone thought it was great language until it got tested. And then it was like really bad language. And as an attorney, as soon as I read it, I was like, oh my gosh. And my prayer was that our agent had been, the buyers, who were very like know-it-alls and kind of pushy, had said, they had sent her an email that said, please include this language as our contingency in the special provisions, and told her exactly what to write, she could have stuck it in there and she would be covered, because they were telling her expressly exactly what to write. But they kind of just told her what they wanted it to say in a conversation, and she wrote it, and she was really on the hook. It was really scary. So please do not do that. Now it's off my soapbox. It was scary.
And so based on these special provisions, can I just check just the one, for example, because it's very competitive, can I just add the term that's kind of like this kind of like the contract will be void kind of like for the certain time, for example, tomorrow by say 7 p.m. or by 6 p.m. or by noon or something like that?
Yeah. So what Lulu's asking is, can you put like a deadline? And that might be the only other thing. And there's different schools of thought on whether to do this or not. I think it's a good idea, so that your offer doesn't hang out there in perpetuity, to say like, this offer automatically expires at 5 p.m. on X day. Now, does that mean that if the seller passes X p.m. on that day, they couldn't still respond, and then that's an offer to you? Sure. Could they execute after that point and send it back to you as an executed deal? No. So you could say something like, this offer automatically expires at 5 p.m. on February 14th, 2022. And then it's hanging out there, but it has an expiration date.
Can that be
Angela?
conveyed in the email that accompanies the offer and still stand that?
You can do that too,
deadline?
sure. I mean, it's not in the four corners of the document, so maybe arguably no. So if you put that in the email but it is a writing, so yes. I guess the question is, do you want to be held contractually to everything that you put in all of your cover emails? Not really. So it's better in the document, I think. Angela, you may have a different
I
opinion.
agree. Yeah, I definitely
And
agree.
so if they kind of like pass the deadline and so you kind of like put it on the special provisions and so still receive no response, that just means the seller has no interest to you. Am I understanding right?
Yeah, I mean, if they don't ever just even acknowledge, they don't have to even acknowledge or respond to your offer. There's no requirement there. Is it a professional courtesy between realtors? Yes. Is the seller legally required to? No, ever respond. So, yeah, if they don't respond to you, they weren't interested. And all you're doing, this happened to me once. I learned this lesson the hard way. I used to write offers for investors all the time. And I got a call from one of these like terrible REO agents in Fort Worth that does like hundreds of deals. And she called me back like 9 weeks later and was like, oh, we accepted your offer. We're under contract. And I was like, I don't even know what deal you're talking about, because I didn't have any language in there where my offer expired. Does that make sense?
Zareen,
Yeah.
question. So I've seen language in there that says this offer may be deemed to be null and void if not responded to by whatever. It's not definitive. So does that
Yeah.
even do any good?
It's not great language, right? That's where like our words are so important. Like it may or it may not. So I would
Right.
just be definitive. Here's the deal. All that you're doing is saying like, they can't come back. Like if that agent had sent me a signed contract back, then we would be under contract, right? So all you're doing by including this language in the contract is saying like, if they send it back to you signed, then if you wanted to execute, you would just cross that out and initial it and send it back, and then you'd be under contract. So using the word may is not very good.
It's almost like a threat in
Yeah.
a way.
And I mean, and if you don't really mean it, you can also just put like Paula did, and this is not a terrible way to do it. If you want, if you would prefer, if you don't want to be so aggressive, you can just put in the cover email, buyer requests your response by 5 p.m. on whatever. And then you're just saying like, hey, we would like to hear from you. But in this day, right now, when the sellers have all the leverage, you know, you can't really force someone to respond. All that you're doing is taking away their power to execute and return it to you
Okay, thanks.
after the deadline.
Serena, I have a quick question. I always put a response time. However, I have found like with the multiple offer situation where you're in that like 450 price range, that they're not gonna, it's hard to put a response time in there. You know, they do have a deadline by which, of course, they're telling you to submit all the offers, but you don't know exactly when they're going to always respond to all the offers. So I have noticed myself not putting, you know, in that price range, a lot of multiple offers, especially I guess in multiple offer situation, not putting a timeline to respond in there. And I don't like not doing that for this, you know, what you just said, of course, but then do I have to like, I guess I have to even though they, you know, decide on somebody else and they don't accept your offer, then it's smart to just send the amendment saying whatever it is, addendum or whatever.
Yeah,
it is.
I mean, you could just send an email and say like the buyer rescinds
Okay.
an offer. It's really unnecessary.
Okay, you can do an email. Okay.
Yeah, you can. And I mean, the other thing is that you can also just, usually in multiple offers, like, you know, when they're collecting for highest and best.
Right.
Generally, not always. So you can put that time, like, or the next day or something like that. And you can also just explain to them like, look, I'm a nerd. I don't like to have offers hanging out in perpetuity. So we put this in there, but obviously if you guys respond after us, like, we want to negotiate.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, good. That's what I'll do.
All right. I think we beat
Okay,
that one.
great.
Those were
Here-
good questions.
Paragraph 12, settlement. This is basically showing how things are going to be divvied up. If the, at closing, paragraph A1B is if the seller is going to contribute to the buyer's closing costs. And again, we're not seeing much of this in this market. And like we also said with the home warranty, this is normally seen in situations where if you're doing it up front, if it's like a first time buyer, they don't have much cash and, you know, so they're going to be raising the price because they'd rather pay $20 a month more in a mortgage than coming out of pocket, say an extra $5,000 or something like that. Where we do see this section come into play is on the amendment. So when you're negotiating repairs, it'll reference this and stuff. So, you know, you'll say in lieu of, you know, that in lieu of repairs, they're going to just give you, you know, $5,000 instead of having the plumber come out.
Yeah, so that's the 12A1B is just a number that you guys should just know. And because it's built into the amendment. Hold on, I'm going to show it to you. That instead of, you know, if you want the seller to fix A, B, and C, you can list that out there and actually ask the seller. Are you guys looking at the amendment right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can list out, you can say, you know, seller will repair items, you know, 5, 6, and 7 in the inspection dated, whatever. I would be really specific and reference the inspection so that the seller knows exactly what they're supposed to repair. Or you can upload your inspection to punch list, have them price it out, and just put here, the amount in section 12A1B is changed to $4,000 or whatever it is, right? The number that you're going to ask the seller to contribute towards closing. Does that make sense? You can see it specifically. This happens so often that it's built into
Right.
our amendment. Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
But if you're, so then here's the other caveat. If you're going to put a number in here, say it's $8,000 worth of repairs, depending on your price of the home, if the buyer is getting a loan, there's only so much available to them to get credited back. So you have to check with your lender, what number this might be. In conventional, I think it's between 3 to 6%. So it can get to be a pretty big number, but you don't want to say in lieu of repairs, seller's going to give $25,000. And then the only amount available with the loan that the buyer is able to be credited is $16,000. And you just lost the benefit of that $9,000 you negotiated for. Does that make sense? You need
Okay.
to talk to the lender to make sure that the number that you're putting in here is okay. that's the thing to remember, basically. Good?
I have a question. So I'm gonna probably be making an offer on something where my buyer does want to get an option period and he does want to get an inspection, but we're gonna put language in there that Angela has given me about we're not gonna ask for more than blank dollars. So would it be a good idea to just to make it more objective on the cost to say pursuant to a estimate by punch list? Like, do a lot of agents use punch list, and would that be a good thing to say?
I don't think you need to reference it in if you're going to pick a number, just pick a number. I think having punch list as a resource is really valuable because that's the hardest thing to do as an agent is scramble to get estimates of what these repairs are going to cost. So being able to upload your inspection to punch list and have every repair itemized is like so valuable. So if you guys aren't using it, I encourage you to use it. It's free for you guys. And they have I think a 1-day turnaround for us because we're Briggs Freeman and we have a special deal. So
You explain what that is, punch list, for those of us who are newer?
yeah. So if you go to BF Office, it's on the homepage and it'll take you straight to punch list. But basically they're a company where you upload your inspection report and they'll itemize every repair, the cost of every repair. So you can go through and you can say, well, we wanted this, this, and this, and punch list is estimating that that's going to cost $2,500. So we're just going to ask for $2,500. And then if you want, after closing, punch list will come and do the work. So, I mean, a lot of times buyers ask for things for repairs just for cash and then they don't do the repairs, but punch list will come and do the work. And we've had agents do it. Jessica just used it on her own home. She said it was great. So it's a really, really like super valuable resource for you guys. Does that help?
Okay. So they have vetted trades.
Yeah. Mhm. Yes.
Okay, so back to page 6 of the contract, down at the bottom, paragraph 13, prorations. It is just pointing out that up through the date of closing, that's one of the jobs of the title company is to do an accounting of, taxes and everything that was owed up until that date. So the seller will be paying for that and the buyer will be responsible for everything else for the rest of the year going forward. Let's see. Casualty law.
They just changed the tax law where if you buy something in the middle of the year, you can switch it to your homestead. You don't have to wait until the next year.
Right, that is true. That is true. Yes. So casualty loss on page 7, this is the section that comes into play if something catastrophic happens to the house and the insurance needs to get involved. We saw a lot of this back when the tornado happened and back there in snowpocalypse last year. So always fun times if you're under contract and there's a house flood or something. So just kind of dealing with the different options because the seller's required to deliver the property in the same condition it was at the time of the contract. So seller's responsible for doing that. And the buyer has, several different options. They may terminate. They may extend the time of performance up to 15 days and extend the closing. And then the third one says they can accept the property in the damaged condition and get the insurance proceeds. The tricky thing on that is insurance companies are becoming more and more reluctant to go ahead and assign the proceeds. So
what does it mean to extend the time for performance, but then the closing date? I thought, what does that mean? How is performance different from when we close?
I think it's basically that, isn't it, Zareen? And that you don't have to do an amendment. It's just going to kind of it doesn't have to be agreed. It's just kind of automatically happens.
I think they're talking about performance is the restoring the property. So this is, and anytime you get into a situation where we're going to have to be looking carefully at this property, it's going to take like the parties working together to like work the deal out. Right. But it's probably like, oh, well, we went under contract and then there was a huge hailstorm. So the roof got damaged. And so I'm going to make an insurance claim and I can repair the roof. We were supposed to close on March 1st, but guess what? The roofer can't come out till March 15th. So we're going to, and that's past the 15 days or whatever. Okay. So it said the roofer can't come out till March 29th. Okay. Well, that's more than 15 days, but we're going to extend time, we're gonna extend it, we're all gonna agree to send the time in an amendment and move the closing date. Does that make sense? So
Okay.
you're gonna have to work together in
Yeah.
those situations.
Paragraph 16 is default. This is if one of the party, does not meet its performance obligations, and the parties have kind of the two main remedies, which is to enforce specific performance or other relief as may be required by law, or terminate and get the earnest money back as liquidated damages, which is, and again, specific performance, it's hard to make someone sell a property to you or a buyer to buy something. So really you're looking at, earnest money, and, there can be fights if it's not clear, but those are the two biggies. So
A lot of times if you have clients who are attorneys, they're gonna cross through specific performance because that's just what they're trained to do. So it's not a huge deal. I always say make it mutual, but don't be alarmed if that happens. Just call and we can walk through it.
So escrow, this is just kind of stating the title company's role as escrow officer, that they're not, part of the contract. They're real reluctant to make decisions like in an earnest money dispute about, they don't want to make decisions. They don't want to be drawn into the contract. So this paragraph 18 is really talking about that, and then questions that comes up if there is an earnest money dispute. So when everyone's fighting for it. So
Yeah, this paragraph C governs what you should do if there's a disagreement about earnest money. You never read this paragraph until you get into that situation, and we all will at some point. So
yes. Okay, foreign tax requirements. Sometimes if if the seller is foreign, there is some additional documentation that has to be signed. FERPA is what it's called. So just be aware of that. Notices. This is important, and that we see this all the time. You present your offer, you put in the buyer in your information, and the seller never fills in the side over there. So this is just really try to monitor this. So to make sure we have notices, because you've got to be able to, you don't want an argument to ensue that there has not been proper notice given. And you also want to make sure that the notice is going to the principals, to the buyer, to the seller, and with the agents copied. So you don't want to be the one and only notice person, because, that it just puts a lot of the responsibility on you, and really it's their property. So
On the seller side, can you put in the agent's phone number and email and the seller's name? Can you fill that in yourself if you're representing the buyer?
I mean, if you get an offer back from and nothing's in there, then you can always just put CC agent here. Because you need someone to give legal notice to. Obviously, if it's blank, you're going to end up emailing it to the listing agent, because that's been the mode of communication so far. But I putting CC agent is if they leave it totally blank, that's the best way to handle it. You do not want to be in that situation where you're the legal point person. So make sure that you ask your clients what their preferences are and fill it out.
Section 22 is where we're noting what is attached to the contract. Obviously, the third party financing addendum is a very common one. Another one is, if you're the lead-based paint, if it's pre-1978, different other things, such as a lease back, other non-realty item, maybe an other, different other situations, but make sure those are all checked, and the OCs are going to be looking at this in conjunction with what you upload to make sure you have everything. On the
So really, I mean, I think, do you guys have any, the effective date, we all know that the effective date is the date that the last of the two parties signs and delivers. It's not just signs. So if you get the offer back from the buyer at 5 o'clock and you send it to your seller and they sign it at 11:30 PM. And that today is not the effective date. If you email it to them tomorrow, tomorrow's the effective date. It's the date that the final acceptance is communicated. So you just have to be mindful of that.
Okay, so that typically, I was told whomever signs last to assign that date field to. So you're saying that we shouldn't assign that field to anybody and then ask the agent fill
You
it after
can.
we have.
No, you can, but delivery is the final component, right? So, if if the seller counters and you got the buyer and they sign off on everything, but it's 11 PM and they're like, oh, we'd rather our options start tomorrow rather than today, you can hold it until the morning and then date it the morning and send it back to them. The risk that you're taking is that the seller gets another offer over their night and rescinds their counter offer to you. So does that make sense? It's just the date of delivery. So yes, if you're gonna, as soon as you get it back, if you're gonna send it, then you can just assign in DocuSign, like the last person, you can put the date stamp there. You just have to be careful that you're gonna actually deliver it that same
Okay.
day.
Because you maybe if you didn't deliver it, then it may say the 15th, but you're not delivering it to the 16th. So, and you need to iron it out if there looks like there's gonna be a discrepancy like that.
Yeah.
And where
and
do we,
everyone is on the same page.
right, so where do we iron it out? I mean, on Richard with the title company, who do we say, hey, they put executed date because they signed it at 11:30 PM, but I didn't get it to my party until the next day. So do we just say that to the title company on an email and they correct it on their paperwork, or how do we go about that?
Well, I mean, if you know that, then you should fix it, right? Before you send it, if they signed it at 11:30 PM and it came to you and you didn't forward it till the next morning, before you deliver it, you could fix it. But if it gets delivered with the wrong one, then you can talk to the listing agent and say, I'm sorry, let's agree that the effective date is today, please confirm. And as long as you have it in writing, you should be fine.
Otherwise, I need to cross it and then have everybody initial.
No, you can just cross it out and fix it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thanks for hanging in, guys. We're at the end. The one important thing, so typically, you put the listing agent here and the buyer's agent here. If you guys are doing an in-house deal and you put, BFSIR here, of course, you type it out and put the license, then you check this box and the listing agent here, if it's Angela's deal and I'm representing the buyer, then I go over here, right? And this side doesn't get filled out because we're the listing broker and the selling broker. So we see this mistake all the time, but if it's a BFSIR in-house deal where we've got both sides, only this side gets filled out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. And then this is what the title company will fill out this information.
I have a general question. So if I cross out, let's say like in the case of the survey, which I have to do later because I didn't know, if there's any section of the contract that I've already been instructed by my client that then I could cross out, do I still need to have everybody initial that? Or if I present it like that and it's signed, it means that they accept that cross out and the cross out doesn't have to be initialed?
I mean, I would put an initial by it just to acknowledge it. But if it's in your original offer, you don't necessarily need to do that. But anytime you're going to cross something out, I would have everyone initial it.
Even if it's the first time around, the original offer?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
It can't hurt, right?
Okay. And I typically cross out on my buyer's agreement that if the seller doesn't pay, then they would have to pay. So do they have to initial that too, then my buyers, or that just signing the agreement with that crossed out is okay?
It's a best practice just to do it. So,
To have an initial, okay.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have any other questions? Thanks for hanging in there, guys. I know this was long. Anyone have any other questions? I'm going to remind you that if you want CE approval, put your name and your license number into the chat. So far, I have Blake, Emily, Betsy, Marissa, and Ashley. If there's anyone else that wants CE credit, that's fine. It's $10 to CG Partners. Anyone have any questions, thoughts, things we need to discuss?
I guess not. I mean, it's a lot, it gets longer and longer, so which is why it's taking longer and longer to review.
Well, thank y'all for joining us this
Yeah,
morning.
thank you guys so much. Next week, we
Thanks.
will be covering mock closings with the title company. It should be a good one.
For
This was
sure.
really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah.
guys.
Very helpful.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
guys.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.